Hi everybody, welcome to Indycar. I'm Gordon Ross. Today it is the 21st of August and today I'm talking about the GERS figures. These are the government's expenditure and revenue Scotland figures. Now, a lot of people make a lot of fuss about the GERS figures because the unionist trolls in particular like to try and poke fun at us and trying to goad us into talking about what the GERS figures mean and why we have such a gigantic, huge black hole in our economy and this enormous deficit that we have supposedly run up in the last few years, and how Scotland couldn't possibly become independent and fend for itself because of the overwhelming burden of this deficit. Well, I'm here to tell you straight off the cuff that GERS is a complete fantasy. GERS has been created by the UK government to tell Scots that they have borrowed 8% of what England has borrowed, and therefore they're responsible for 8% of whatever the deficit is in the UK. Now, plainly, Scotland, because it is governed by a devolved parliament, a devolved government, is not allowed to borrow any money at all. It's never been allowed to borrow any money, and because of that, Scotland has always run in the black. We've never run up any debts of any kind at all, ever. We just don't do it. Scotland has for the last 50, 60 years run at a profit every single year in the black, always having a trade surplus, always earning more money than we spend, always bringing in more foreign currency than we spend on imports. So the GERS figures are a fantasy. They're a fairy tale concocted by the British government to try to convince us that we are in some way useless and poor and unable to fend for ourselves. But they neglect to tell you that the GERS figures are based on us giving all of our tax receipts to London and then letting them top slice a huge percentage of that off the top and then return the meagre amount that is left to us, in which we have to then use to support our entire country. And so, on paper, it can look as if Scotland is actually making less tax than it really is, because the taxation which comes back to Scotland to be spent here is far less than we send down south. Now, the British government or the English government would argue, and specifically a lot of these trolls will argue, that we have to pay for all the great services that the British state provides for Scotland. Now, what are these great services and why do they cost so many billions of pounds when we see absolutely nothing for that money? Well, the reason is we are supposed to be getting our defence budget from the UK. We're supposed to be defended by the United Kingdom. Has anybody seen any ships off the shores of Scotland anywhere defending us from anybody at all? Well, I can say honestly that I haven't seen a single military ship for months, apart from the occasional one that comes in to Coolport or into Rosyth or into Faslane to be repaired. But that's about the only reason any military ships ever come to Scotland, is not to defend us from anything, but to get fixed. Submarine base in Faslane, we're paying for that. None of us wants it. None of us asked for submarine base in Faslane. Nobody wants nuclear weapons in Scotland, especially not in Faslane, which is only 20 miles from where I'm sitting at the moment. And yet we're forced to pay for this. Is it defending us from anybody? No. Is anybody planning to invade us? No. Are the Russians threatening Scotland in any way? Again, no. Nobody is threatening Scotland. We don't need to be defended against anybody at the moment. If the Russians happen to fly their planes close to our airspace, we simply send up the odd fighter to go and just give them a wave and say, off you go, chaps. No threat whatsoever from the Russians. The Russians have got no designs on Scotland at all. The only interest they have in us is because the nuclear weapons are sited here. Not because they want to take over Scotland, but because the Americans have used this as a nuclear first strike launch facility. Now, that would worry any state. I mean, the Americans had a huge crisis because the Russians put missiles in an island off their continent, and yet the Americans put missiles on an island off the continent of Europe. and nobody says anything's wrong with that. So what I'm getting at here is the GERS figures are gerrymandered, they're manipulated to create the impression that Scotland's too poor to stand on its own 2 feet. We all know that that's a fantasy. We all know that Scotland's running at a profit, and we all know that that profit is being hoovered up in London and used in other parts of England. Our money is supporting the rest of the UK, and then the meagre ration that's left is given back to Scotland as pocket money. We get a pat on the head and say, you're too poor to stand on your own 2 feet. Here's what's left of the money you gave us. Now that plainly is the situation that GERS has put us in. That's what GERS is about. GERS is a con. It's always been a con. It's the only measurement we are allowed of our own economic state of affairs, and it's a measurement which Scotland doesn't make itself. It's a measurement made from London by the people who control the amount of money that flows into Scotland in the first place. So basically London is saying, we're making you poor, but you're also too poor now to go it alone because we're keeping you poor, which is a complete contradiction in terms. If Scotland left the United Kingdom, London would not be able to keep us poor. We would have all our own tax money at our disposal, and we would not have any deficit at all because we've never borrowed any money. And this is a fact you have to hammer home to everybody who is wavering about whether to vote for independence. Scotland has no historic debt. It has never borrowed a cent from anybody. In its entire existence, it's never borrowed money on the open market. The British state runs on loans from foreign banks. It does not run on tax money. The tax money is taken in and destroyed. The British government then borrows money from international bankers who create that money specifically for that loan. Britain then has to borrow even more money to make up for the fact that it hasn't got enough taxation to cover last year's spending. And the whole system starts up again. Every single year, the British debt gets bigger and bigger and bigger because the country is so chronically undertaxed and underfunded. Scotland suffers from this because we are made to feel as though we are poor because England is borrowing too much money. Not the case. I repeat again, Scotland has no debt and no deficit, and it has never had one. We are being given a share of a debt that belongs to somebody else. It's like your neighbour borrows £100,000, can't repay it, and demands that the next door neighbour pays for some of his debt. Now, who in their right mind would ever do such a thing? And who in their right mind would accept that that was fair? Nobody. Okay, in other news, Jeremy Corbyn comes to visit Scotland on one of his whistle-stop tours, because actually Jeremy Corbyn's tours are on trains, and they are classic whistle-stop tours. He flies into town on a train, waves out the window, says a few words, jumps on the train and flies back out again. Every time he comes to Scotland, it's apparently to bolster his failing party in Scotland. And every time he leaves Scotland, nothing has changed. No improvement has been made. Mr. Corbyn is a man of principles only when it comes to every other country except Scotland. Corbyn wants self-determination for every other small country on earth except Scotland. Scotland, for some reason, is hated so much by Jeremy Corbyn that he will not accord us the same support, the same principles that he applies to other countries, like Palestine, like Ireland, like other countries which have been dominated by their neighbours. Corbyn probably wants the Catalans to be free as well, but he will not accept that Scotland should have self-determination. Oh no, it's no good for Scotland. Scotland cannot have it. Corbyn, you're a man of complete contradiction. When it comes to Trident, Jeremy Corbyn, member of CND, campaigns against Trident. What's the first thing he does when he's asked whether Labour will support continuing Trident? Either they abstain or they agree. So Mr. Corbyn hates Trident, but he's fine with it as long as it's parked in Scotland. Absolutely, totally okay for Scotland to be wiped out by nuclear weapons, but not have them in England. So Mr. Corbyn, I'd ask you, why Why bother coming to Scotland? You plainly hate the place. You want to see it contaminated with nuclear missiles and nuclear submarines. You're quite happy for that to happen here, but nowhere else on the planet would you allow nuclear weapons. You want self-determination for every small country on the planet, but not Scotland. Why not? What's wrong with us? Why do you hate Scotland, Corbyn? What's wrong with you? And why do you come up here expecting us to support you when you so plainly do not support us? You can't expect anyone in Scotland to vote Labour ever again. Not when you are such an utter hypocrite. And I'm talking as a former Labour member here. I would never vote for Labour again. It is the biggest shower of liars, hypocrites, and Corbyn, I'm afraid you might be loved in England by your supporters there, but in Scotland you are nothing. Nobody likes you, nobody wants you. We are returning precisely what you feel about us. You're happy for us to be a nuclear dump, and you're happy for us never to get free from the British state. You want self-determination for the rest of the world, but not for us. Frankly, you don't deserve to be Prime Minister of this country, this UK anyway, and I don't think you even could be, because you can't make your mind up about anything and your party abstains on every single issue that they should be opposing the Tories on. Labour is a joke, north and south of the border. If that is not a rant, I don't know what is, but I'm angry today. I've always been angry about Corbyn. I see the man as a complete liar and a hypocrite. And listening to him desperately not answering the same question 6 times in a Channel 4 interview. He was asked if he thought that Britain would be better off after Brexit, and he refused point blank to answer the question straight. He trotted out the party line over and over and over again, never said what he thought. He's too scared to say what he thinks because he thinks we're better off with Brexit. Corbyn is a Brexiteer. Corbyn is a nuclear fan. Corbyn is also not a fan of any kind of self-determination for Scotland. A hypocrite, a liar, and a man of no principle whatsoever when it comes to standing up for both Scotland and standing up for people in England who oppose the Tories. I think Corbyn should go, and they should get a leader who's got a bit of backbone and who's got a spine enough to stand up straight and tell the Tories no more. But he's not going to do it. He never can do it because he's in league with them. When that banner came out yesterday on Corbyn's welcome, a big red banner that said "Red Tories Out," that's exactly what the welcome is in Scotland for Corbyn nowadays. Labour is no longer seen as a party of the left in Scotland. Labour is seen as the collaborator of the Tories, and time upon time they have abstained on votes where they should have opposed the Tories and didn't. What is wrong with Labour? Have they been got at? Is Jeremy Corbyn just a puppet? Well, I think you can judge for yourself. But anyway, 2 things to remember today. Scotland has no debt and is perfectly capable of standing on its own 2 feet. And Jeremy Corbyn, go away and don't bother coming back. You're not welcome here. Bye for now.